Our first speaker is Dr. Maripaz E. Morales. She is a full professor 6 at the Philippine Normal University and the director of the publication office that manages 3 journals. She also serves as the editor-in-chief of 2 ASEAN Citation Index journals in the Philippines, particularly the Normal Lights and the Journal of Educational and Human Resource Development. Recently, she received the Research Citation Award from the Philippine Normal University. She has been confirmed a regular member of the National Research Council of the Philippines or NRCP and a recipient of the NRCP Achievement Award in 2019 for Division 1 Governmental, Educational and International Policies. She is also the current chair of the said division. Her research interests focus on science education, cultural studies in science education, indigenous knowledge, STEAM, TIPAC, gender education, and participatory action research. She has and is engaging in different research configurations, including institutional, national, and international research collaborations. She is also a PhD paper reader and evaluator of the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. Let us all welcome Dr. Marie Paz E. Morales.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you, Miss Reva Ansumulong, for that kind introduction. So good afternoon to my colleagues in Register and to all students, graduate students of the Philippine Normal University, as well as our invitees and our participants. I think there are a lot of participants. Tama po ba, Sir Victor?
Yes po, we have a lot of participants as of today po. We have more than 170, Dr. Morales.
Okay, so welcome to the Philippine Normal University, to all our guests. Without further ado, let me share my slide. I am tasked to present to you action research, manuscript preparation, and publication in the normal lights. But the second one, probably I will be discussing the general preparation of action research manuscripts. Okay. So for a while po, cannot see my... Okay, I hope that you can see my presentation.
Yes, clear.
Okay, thank you. So for this afternoon, I am given about 40 minutes to discuss everything to you. Okay, so I hope I will be able to give you enough for you to be able to conduct action research, manuscript preparation, and publication as well. Okay, so for today, I section the presentation into two. We have the basics of action research and research reporting, basically all about the basics of research writing. How do we compare research report? And how does that compare to article format manuscripts and some of the key parts of an article? So moving forward, when we say action research, I know that there are a lot of teachers from DepEd from the audience. So I hope that you'll get something which will be useful to you in preparation for your action researches. So when you say action research, we usually perform or conduct action research if we want to change or improvement in our classrooms. If we want to have critical observations on things and you want them changed or improved. And of course, if you have bright ideas. Normally, we start with ideas, then you have plans, and then you implement actions. So those are some of the processes that we usually do when we conduct action research. So more often than not, when you say action research, this is carried out by teachers. So us teachers in our own classrooms with our own students, and what we wanted is for us to engage in some improvements, especially in the aspects of teaching and learning. Basically, Dick in 2001 presented action research as a family of research methodologies. So during that time, Dick 2001 was mentioning about change, and that's known as the action, and understanding, that's for the research. So when we say action research, it's all about changes and understanding. Okay, but then later on, we had we came up with, or most researchers and some people came up with the generations of action research, so that you would know what are the foci of each generation. So for the first generation, we did not start with educational action research. We wanted to have something about improving the capacity and practices of researchers. During this time, Lewin observed in 1944 that there are a lot of social scientists and scientists, and they just cannot take a look at their researches as pure researches. They wanted something that will document how they improve as researchers. So there comes in documenting their processes and practices, and that's where action research comes in. Okay, so that's the first generation. It started out in the social sciences. Okay, and then later on in 1995, Corey introduced action research in education. So that was the first generation. The second generation is all about action research in education and in the social field, or the social sciences. So we have critical pedagogy, dialogical reflective methods by Freire. We have power and empowerment by Foucault. We have participatory action research that would bring about emancipation. That was some of the works also of Grundy in 1982, together with some modes of action research that he was able to come up with. We have technical, practical, and emancipatory. And then the third generation, this is all about empowering education, improving social practice through change, and radical changes. So these were the people behind the third generation of action research. And the fourth generation is what we are encountering right now. This is initiated by the following people: Whitehead. So if you are engaging in action research, you might probably encounter these people in your reading. So Whitehead, Chemis, and Taggart. Okay, there. So that's the fourth generation. So we belong to the fourth generation of action researchers. So in 2009, Pine redefined action research. Instead of it being taken as a methodological framework, it's encompassing a lot more than the methodologies of a particular investigative activity. So it becomes a paradigm or an approach or a research model. Okay, so that's by Pine in 2009. After some time, we had to identify also some of its cousins. So AR is not a single child, o kaya ano, kaisa-isang anak, sabi nga, no? Meron siyang mga kapatid at meron siyang mga kamag-anak o mga pinsan. So we have action science. This is inquiry of how humans design their actions in difficult situations. That's reasoning behind reflection in action. And we have action learning. The focus here is forming teams to reflect on the real problem and ultimately solve the complex problem. So usually this happens in the fields of sciences and the basic and applied sciences. Okay, we have appreciative inquiry. This is a perspective which aims to build and rebuild the organizations around what works. So for example, in the field of education, we are not the frontliners in this time of pandemic. So we cannot address the pandemic head on. Okay, so what we can do is try to take a look at what works for us, and then we build and rebuild from there. So the reason why we have this learning continuity, etc. Okay, then we have the community-based action research. This emphasizes equitable relationship between communities and academic researchers. So more often than not, this is all about bringing in empowerment to those who are oppressed. so so for social change. Okay, that's community-based action research. Some others are participatory action, leadership action research. We have the youth participatory action research, which focuses on teenage pregnancy, drug addiction, and some others. Okay, and participatory action research. So when do we use action research? Well, if you want to solve an educational problem within your classroom, we usually engage in classroom-based action research. We make use of our classroom as our research environment or research laboratory. Okay, if we wanted to help educators reflect on their own practices. Like for example, I am engaging in an online learning class and I do synchronous and asynchronous. I wanted to know how much percentage uh, between asynchronous and synchronous would bring about good engagement of students. So that would be a good action research. If I wanted to address school-wide problems, so let's say, for example, absenteeism, so it could be a school-wide problem. Okay? Or, for example, there is a prevalent dengue cases, so school-wide problem. Okay? When teachers want to improve their practices, so that's when we use action research. So in 1982, as I mentioned a while ago, Grandy had these modes of action research. So we have the technical, the practical, and the emancipatory. So for the technical, what we have is teachers here are the consumers and supporters of innovation. So for example, you encountered Nearpod. Nearpod, you know Nearpod, probably, okay? Okay, how many of you knows Nearpod? Okay, so for example, you know Nearpod and you adopted Nearpod and executed a quiz show in your class using Nearpod and you wanted to know how engaged your students are. That's technical action research. It's because of the fact that you are using something which have been designed and developed by other researchers. Okay, so you're trying out that particular research, particular product or instrument which you did not develop. Okay, so you are a consumer or supporter of an innovation. For practical action research, you become the co-designer. So for example, instead of just using Nearpod, you designed a lesson exemplar using Nearpod, but then again, you had some modifications in it. Okay, so you become co-designer of the innovation. Okay. So for example, you mixed it up with some other applications. So that's co-designing of innovation. So it becomes a practical action research. But then if let's say made use of open inquiry, so open inquiry would let you would let your students do the design and all, and you have a way of bringing in a lot of innovations within the particular lesson, then you become you engage into emancipatory action research. So those were the modes of AR by Grandi in 1982. So moving forward, we have the two other portions. I mean the two latter portions, the practical and emancipatory. So here we have the practical and the participatory. So for practical, we study local practices, and this involves individual or team inquiry. They focus on teacher development and student learning. We implement here a plan of action. What we wanted is this would be leading to us being teachers as well as researchers. So teacher researchers or reflective practitioners as they call. Okay. In participatory, we try to understand some social issues and we try to emphasize equal collaboration. So that's what we call as participatory or collaborative nature of action research. And we try to take a look at what constrains the individual lives of the participants. So we focus here on life-changing or life-enhancing changes. Okay, so this is the result in when we conduct emancipatory or participatory action research. So we have emancipated researchers. Okay, so when we design our AR, we can probably adopt the conventional way of designing AR we can start with identifying an area of focus. We move towards collection of data. We analyze and interpret the data, develop an action plan, and then we go back to identify again another area of focus from the results that we gathered from the first cycle that we had. But then we can have some um, deviations from this cycle. Okay, so probably we can start with collected data. So from the collected data, you can identify the area of focus. So for example, you notice that in your Google Classroom, there are a lot of missing. Di ba ganon sa Google Classroom? Missing. So ibig sabihin, may problema, di ba? Anong problema? So you started out with the data. And so you identify the area of focus. And from the area of focus, we can identify some plans, okay? So we can gather data again, interpret data, and develop an action plan, okay? So that's what we can do when we design action research, okay? So in designing action research, we can start with our classrooms, okay? So for example, in science department, okay? You are a member of the science faculty in the science department, and you are teaching physics, for example. You can conduct a classroom-based action research, okay? You start out with your plan, then you implement, act, you observe, okay, and then you reflect. And then if let's say in a science department, there are about there are about 10 of you, okay, who are doing classroom-based action research, implementing plan, act, observe, reflect, then that would mean department-wide. So pwede nating extend school-wide. And then, so the cycle of plan, act, observe, reflect, plan, act, observe, reflect is encompassing larger area or larger aspect of the school or the community. Okay? So in designing action research, we can identify the plan as your first stage. Sorry for the typographical error here. So it has to be stages. How did we design it? So how would we define the standards? We have to describe the plan for instruction. So that's for the plan. Then we have act. So let's try it. We carry out the action plan, okay? Then we have to observe what happens when we carried out our action plan. We examine evidences of improvement if there are, or if there are none, then we can go back and reflect and discuss what happened. Saan ba may problema? Diba? Kailangan ba nating palitan? Etc. Okay, so the cycle moves on until we have a good evidence of improvement. So that's for your plan, act, observe, discuss. Please do not forget this basic paradigm for action research or basic framework for action research, because this is what we use when we write the manuscripts as well. Okay. So some of the characteristics of AR, one, it has a practical focus. So there has to be a problem and there has to be some benefactors, immediate benefactors of this action research. So pwedeng yung teacher, pwedeng yung school, pwedeng yung community. Okay? Another is, this is a study of an educator researcher's own practice. So this is all about your practice if you're going to conduct your action research. So it's very important that we do self-reflection. So a self-reflective research by educator researchers. Okay, you wanted to turn the lens on of your educational classroom, schools, and practices or community. Who turn the lens on there? Okay. This also emphasizes collaboration. So even if you're the only one, the only teacher in your class, of course, diba? Kayo isa lang na teacher ng class nyo. Okay, you're the only teacher in the class, and you are going to conduct an action research within your class. You need to have help. Okay, so you have to collaborate. You need to collaborate with your students. Okay, you need to collaborate with your stakeholders. Okay, like probably your local government. Okay, your administrators, your staff, the teachers, your co-teachers, and of course the parents of your students. Specifically, if you are dealing with minor students, you need to have their consent. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This also underscores a dynamic process. So it's a spiraling back and forth of reflection, data collection, action. So pag binalikan natin yung ating paradigm, has to be plan, act, observe, and reflect. Okay, so I think I need to erase this one. Okay, there. Yeah. Okay, may isa pa. Ayan. Okay. It doesn't follow a linear pattern. As I've mentioned a while ago, you can start in any part. You can do the cycle, and then you can probably you can follow the convention, or you may deviate. You can start with the collection of collected data, or you can start with the planned action. Or nakita nyo may problema doon, so you can start out with that and identify the problem focus, etc. It doesn't follow a causal sequence from problem to action. Okay, so this is another of the key characteristics of action research. We also have with a specified plan of action. So as we have mentioned a while ago, we have plan, act. So the researcher develops a plan of action. So it may be formal, informal, involves few people or the entire community, as long as there is a plan of action. Maybe representing or maybe presenting data to stakeholders, exploring new practices. Okay, so there is a plan of action. We also advocate research sharing. Okay, so for research sharing, after you are done with your investigation, we do something like this. Okay, we share our outputs to the group of stakeholders, to the local school, educational personnel, to your colleagues, and to all individuals and groups who want to promote change. Okay. So some things to remember when we talk about action research, it's contextualized, small scale, specifically if you're talking about your class, okay, or it's within the locality or the community, okay. AR is evaluative and reflective, so moving from one step to another or one stage to another requires being reflective and being reflexive as well. Okay. AR focuses on changes based on collected data, and it's cyclical in nature. So that's by Burns in 1990. Okay, so where do we begin? So we can begin anywhere. As I've mentioned a while ago, you can even explore taking action. You can explore the collected data. You can also have the conventional way of doing research to identify the problem. Okay. And for us teachers, our sources of observation may be from instruction, so our strategies, specifically now that we are trying out a lot of things, okay? Assessment, or how do we diagnose, how do we assess, how do we do formative assessment, how do we do summative assessment, how do we do feedbacking, how do we ensure how do we ensure that there are no goods moving from one email to another? Goods ang tawag nila, di ba? Pag may nalilipat na mga specific items na may sagot na. Okay. Or classroom management. So this involves probably parents' involvement in in the classes or in the learning processes of the students. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so now, since one of the things that I should do is to acquaint everyone with how do we try to develop or write a manuscript, an action research manuscript, probably it's good if we try to take a look at some articles which are already published. Okay, so let's do some reviewing of AR articles. Article lang, isa lang ang nilagay ko dito. Kasi baka umabot tayo ng alas 8, di ba? Si Sir Inero nag-aantay. So I will be providing some details. You can read the full paper if you want later. Okay? So this matrix includes participants, instruments and data collection. You have data analysis, and then from there, we can identify what the AR or the action research is all about and the probable questions which were asked, okay, in the manuscript. So this is the title of the action research. I sourced this from the Journal of Teacher Education, Teacher Action Research. Okay. The title is Action Research in an Ethiopian Classroom. Okay. Instructional methods that improve vocabulary retention. So these are the authors. So there are three authors. Okay. These are some details in the article. There were 19 kindergarten students who are English language learners in an elementary school in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. 6 are boys and 13 are girls, and they are within age range 4 to 6 years old. Okay, so the instruments and data collection, I have them clumped together. The description of the three methods. They had 3 methods worksheets: Jazz Chant, picture book, and read aloud. And then for the procedure, they had to have some assent and consent confirmation first because they're dealing with minors. Then they have this initial data. So if you would notice, they are starting out with a data. Okay. They have the global assessment of student vocabulary knowledge, and this was the report of a former teacher. So they were starting out with collected data already. Instructional methods are identified as or narrated as. All 3 were used. These were the 3 methods used for 3 days, 20 minutes each. Okay, same sequence each day. Worksheet, jazz, read aloud. Okay, and the procedure is as follows. This is for their assessment. They recorded manually. Individual page per participant was allotted in the research notebook. And each participant's page had a table with rows for 1 day, 2, and 3, and columns. The columns were for the 3 instructional strategies. Within the instructional strategies column, the 5 vocabulary words for each approach were listed. And then correct responses received check marks next to the respective vocabulary word. And then the researchers determined a score for each student assessment. So for example, a student who was present for the 3 days of data collection received 9 scores in total. Okay. These were the data analysis that they used. Mean and SD, Pearman test. So it's an inferential non-parametric equivalent of ANOVA, and F statistics, chi-square. We have with alpha of 0.05. Okay. So those are some of the details of this particular action research. Okay. So plugging it in the matrix that I have presented a while ago, you have the participants, instruments, data collection. So what is the AR all about? So the topic would be all about vocabulary of students. Okay. Intervention is the assessment methods, and the action is improving or improve the vocabulary of the students. So what might be the probable questions? I just plugged in here. I made use of this in some other presentations. So each time that I use this one, I collect data from the participants. Okay? Kaya lang ngayon hindi natin pwedeng gawin kasi medyo kulang tayo sa oras. Ano? So lalagay ko na lang yung mga naisip nila noon, mga ibang participants. Will the activities provided improve dapat the vocabulary of students? What is the vocabulary status of the students before the intervention? How can students improve their vocabulary, and is there a significant improvement on students' vocabulary status after the intervention was given? So these were all coming from the participants in my previous engagement. Okay, so if you take a look at the manuscript, there are 2 research questions. So one would be for each instructional practice, was there a statistically significant difference in vocabulary retention by day for students? So in terms of the worksheet, jazz chant, and picture book read aloud. Okay. Second one is, which instructional method increased students' vocabulary retention the most? Okay, so it seems that this particular action research is leaning towards the quantitative nature of a research. Okay. Aha. May tanong po, wala po ba talagang method sa template ng Reviewing AR. Pinagsama ko po siya, sir, sa, ayan, there. Data collection and instrument, okay? Basically, if you're using action research, the paradigm that you are using is action research per se. So it's the design, the action research design. So that's the somewhat like the research design for this particular investigation. Okay, so here they just made use of an intervention. So the interventions are the worksheets, Jazz Chan, picture book, and read aloud. Okay, there. So to take a look at the title is Action Research in an Ethiopian Classroom, Instructional Method that Improve Vocabulary Retention. So let's highlight the three parts. If you are trying to come up with a title for an action research manuscript, there has to be three parts. You have to identify the topic, there has to be something for action, and there has to be a visible intervention. Okay, so for this particular research, action research, most probably they have a complete set of these things. Okay, so the topic is vocabulary retention. Action is improvement of something, vocabulary, okay, improve vocabulary retention. And intervention is the instructional methods. Okay. Okay. So any questions before we proceed? For the question of sir, the action research is usually, well, it depends on researchers. Some researchers would want to take a look at action research as leaning towards qualitative design. Some would like to have it as leaning towards quantitative with a mix of qualitative. Some would consider it as mixed. So it depends on how the researcher would want readers to read her or his story, okay, within the classroom. So any questions po before we proceed? Wala po ba? Mamaya na po ba? Okay, sige. So how do we prepare an action research manuscript? Okay, I usually do this. I always have three major phases in preparation. One is I have to prepare myself. So I need to have a checklist and determine if I am prepared to write an action research manuscript. Okay, so for those of you who have listened to me, I always have this as one part of my presentation. I like routine, I like incremental achievement so that I will not be spending the entire day writing my action research. Okay, I cannot do that. I would probably engage in an action research manuscript for 2 to 3 weeks or maximum a month. Okay, I can focus. I accept criticisms positively. So this is really important if you want to be writers or what do you call this one? Authors of manuscripts. Okay. And I have good eyes for details and I have good mind for big ideas. So for the big ideas, normally editors would look for this one. Okay, so what would be your contribution? So ano naman na maiko-contribute ng article mo sa aking journal? Ganun ang tanong, no? I have good eyes for details. I hope that you will not be submitting very raw papers, yung maraming grammatical errors, maraming segmented statements, maraming typographical errors. We don't want that because we wanted to at least impress the editor, okay? I have self-discipline and I am motivated. So these are the things that I usually check before I start writing my papers. Some other self-prep, I have to ensure that I will be able to find a me time for my writing activities if I wanted to complete a paper, okay? I need to have a comfortable place and I need to go to the grocery and buy low carb, low sugar, and good diet food, okay? And I need to have an alarm clock to give me good breaks, okay? And do some physical activities. So these are some preparations for myself. Then I do the journal hunting. Okay, so the first thing that I would need is a journal. So that I will not be spending a lot of time writing, and then later on when I submit, the journal would be requiring something which I did not prepare for. Like, for example, I prepared 6,000 words. Then you submit to Normal Lights. Normal Lights only accept 3,500. Okay, 3,500 words for action research. So, syempre, hindi namin tatanggapin yung paper nyo kasi 6,000 words yon, di ba? So, it is good if you start with the journal hunt before you start writing. Okay? So, what are the things that you need to look for when you start your journal search? You have to know the focus and scope of the journal. For example, are you going to submit in a journal which focuses on science and technology if you are going to write an action research? Well, it depends. It depends on the action research that you're going to write, diba? Publication frequency, kaano karaming mag-publish yung journal sa isang taon. If you choose annually, then the chances of getting published would be a lot smaller than when you choose journals that publish their issues quarterly, parang the more chances of winning kapag mas maraming issues published within the year, di ba? Okay, so some journal types, so probably you can check CHED. Is it CHED recognized? Is it Scopus listed? Is it ASEAN index? Or is it ISI index? Okay, and you have to have a good background of the author guidelines of the journal. So specifically check the number of words and the format and parts. Okay. So this is where we can check for the indexing. So if you wanted to make sure that it's not a predatory journal, you can go to this site and check. Okay. If it's not listed, then probably you can check further the website lodging your applications. Okay. I usually ask my my colleagues or my partners or team, okay, to have this before we start writing our papers. Yeah, we have journal article guide. You can probably make use of this one, so you have an idea about the target journal, okay, before you start writing your papers. Yeah, this is the list of CHED accredited journals where you can submit, and they can take a screenshot and check the different journals. All are online, so you can check all the details of each of the journals. Okay. So what we wanted is, of course, to submit our papers to reputable, hindi refutable, reputable journal, so that our generated knowledge will not be tarnished, kumbaga, di ba? Okay, sayang naman kapag sa predatory journal natin siya na-submit. So how would we identify predatory journals? Maybe we can ask some of these questions. So does the journal charge excessive fees for publication? So siguro magdalawang isip kayo, pag sinisingil kayo ng 50,000 mahigit, di ba? Okay, ano na rin yun, pang iPhone na rin yun, or maraming ibang phones, di ba? Is the scholarship peer-reviewed? You can check that with the schedules that they are providing. Have your colleagues published with the journal? Is the journal included in a reputable index? Or does the journal clearly outlines its publishing process? Okay. I usually receive something about invitation to publish. So this one I received way back 2017 yata, ano? And you would notice that the date of submission, if I submit my paper on May 2017, my paper will be published online on May 22, 2017. So that would require the journal about 2 days for the material to get published. But in reality, when you deal with peer reviews are really tedious and really long, a really long process. Usually, peer reviewers would require at least a month to review. So yung palang peer review process, medyo nawawala sa process na ito. So that would make you think twice, okay? This one is a recent email to me. hindi na masyadong recent, May na ngayon, ano, March 8 ito, ayan. It has an impact factor of 5, mataas, di ba? In education, we seldom have this very high impact factor. Okay, so that's one. So this is in engineering, so obvious naman sa kanila mataas talaga. But then if you take a look at the other parts of the message, you would notice manuscript submission is March 10, and it gets published about March 20, so that would require only about 10 days. So, ganun pa rin, di ba? Ang tanong, kaano katagal magpa-review itong mga ito? Eh, mga reviewers, ang tagal mag-review, di ba? Lalo na kung mga batikang reviewers yung mga yan, kasi marami rin silang tanggap na papel. Okay? And so that would have it would probably give you a, talaga ba talagang totoo ito? Ganon, di ba? Okay. So, if you wanted to publish in our journals, let's have a virtual tour. So, itutour ko lang kayo konti, no? Para naman makita natin ang laman ng aming journal. Okay, so this is the website of the publication office. There, so you can check the different menus. Okay, for those of you in Register, you can check the authenticity software here and these are all sources and resources which you can use when you are having your research subjects within LMS. Okay, Turnitin is embedded in LMS. It's integrated in LMS. Okay. There. So there are 3 journals. The publication office is managing 3 journals. We have the normal lights, and the things that you need for you to be able to have a good view of the entire journal would be in this menu. The first thing that you have to check will be the author guidelines. Okay. So this is the author guidelines. I hope that you will read them in toto para naman malaki ang ating kumpiyansa later na sa pagsasubmit. Okay? So kaya kailangan masunod niyo siya. Editors would always would always require, okay, that good authors will be able to follow all instructions in the author guidelines. Yan. So, kailangan basahin yung maigi yan, di ba? For example, write 1 paragraph, tapos sa abstract ninyo, 3 paragraphs, di ba? So, kung ako si editor, ano ba naman to? Ito lang hindi masunod, di ba? So, kailangan sundan natin. Key parts or key elements, okay? I hope that everything is in place. There, acknowledgement, article format, number of words. We're very particular with that. Remember, 3,000 to 3,500 words only for action research. So if you submit a 6,000 word manuscript, we reject. Okay? There, tables, citations, reference listing. Okay? So that's for the author guidelines. I would like you to check also the publication ethics, okay? And then if you are first timer in this application or this software, you can check this one, submission procedure. So it tells you how you could register and you could submit your paper, okay? Yeah, so it's step-by-step instruction on how to go about registering and submitting your papers. Okay. Although we are managing 3 journals, the process would be the same for all the journals. So we are using the same platforms. Okay, yan. So pare-parehong platform yan. So naiiba lang sa kulay at saka sa design. Siyempre depende sa journal. Now, if you don't want to register yet and you wanted to read some of our articles, you can go to archives. Okay. So these are the issues that we have for 2020, for 2019, 2018, and so on. Okay, so that would be the same for all our journals. Okay, okay, so we go back. Yes, we had a virtual tour. You can check all the other parts later on. Okay. Available naman siya 24/7. Okay, now how do we plan our articles? In planning our articles, we need to take a look at how our articles would be different from the usual research report that we prepare or technical reports. Okay, so probably you can just leave the technical report behind there and let's concentrate on the differences between the the journal article and the research report. So you'd notice they almost have the same parts, key parts. You have keywords, abstracts, introduction, purposes of the research, only that in introduction for the journal article, we don't have a really specified subsection for literature review, statement of the problem, significance of the study, scope and limitation, or definition of terms. Okay, we don't have that. We try to plug it in and try to have a good storyline within our introduction. Then you have the framework of the study, you have the methods. Basically, it has the same subsections, results and discussion, okay? Conclusions and reference list, of course. You would notice all these things are in black, di ba? Kasi kailangan sila lahat. Sinasubmit lahat yan sa GRESO, di ba? Okay. O kaya sa inyong mga respective institutions. In journal article, I had some different colors. Acknowledgement may be optional. Kung ayaw nyo may pasalamatan, wala tayong magagawa. Pero kung ito ay grant, nakakuha kayo ng funding, it is a requirement that you acknowledge the funding agency. Okay? Appendices are optional. You may or may not include appendix or appendices. Supplemental data are also optional. But the cover letter is a must. Okay, it's not part of the manuscript, but it's a required document when you start submitting your papers. Okay, so the journal articles that are usually accepted by journals are as follows. We have research papers, letters, research notes, supplemental articles or data, review articles or miniature articles. But if you are going to write action research, most probably that would fall on research papers or original research. Okay. In writing our AR manuscript, I am not telling you that you have to follow the IMRAD format. Okay, this is I am presenting this as only a framework or a paradigm or a principle when you start writing your anything. When you write your manuscript, your thesis, your action research manuscript. Okay, it has to be taken as a principle. We write the introduction because we wanted to answer why we are conducting the research. So we embed the literature review because we wanted to give a background information to the readers why we need to do, why we do, and why we have conducted this investigation. How did we conduct the investigation? That's the reason why we write the methods. And what are the results of this conducted investigation? We write the results. But the so what, we have to write the conclusions and the discussion. Okay, so it's all about the principle of IMRAD or the introduction method, results and discussion. Okay, in the writing process, it depends on what kind of writer are you. If you usually write your papers in a manner where you try to plan everything first, then most probably this will apply. Okay, so we have the planning stage. You set the framework. You take a look at the author guidelines. You take a look at matrices on how you're going to craft your different key parts of the manuscript. Okay, and then after that, you plug in some details, just like the one we did in the matrix. Okay, you plug in the details in the matrix, and then you write the narrative. After writing the narrative, that's the first draft that you have. So from the first draft, you can check the journal checklist. Tama ba lahat ito in relation to the author guidelines? Okay, kung tama lahat, go to the second draft. Yeah. So for the second draft, you can use applications like Turnitin, Grammarly to check your paper. Okay? And for the third draft, probably you can ask some critical friends, di ba? Para makomentan nila yung inyong papel. Okay? And then again, you read the paper before you submit. Okay? So the preparation stage usually takes a lot of stages as well. Okay. There. So the first thing that we have to think of, syempre title, di ba? Some people would say, I will think about the title later, but usually when I write my articles, I think of a working title. So the working title would give me somewhat framework or to work on while writing the paper. So I have a working title, and this should be short, about 10 to 12 words, reflective of the problem and the main variables of the study, and has to be free of value judgment. We cannot probably say um, an action research on the positive effect of online learning, di ba? Judgmental na judgmental ka naman, positive agad, di ba? Paano kung naging negative? Di wala na. Paano mo masusulat yon? So talagang dapat hindi muna natin lagyan ng mga ganon, di ba? Final articles may be designed after writing the entire article inclusive of the abstract. Okay, so here is another sample action research there. Take a look at the title. Now I can be a poetic writer using action research as a way of reclaiming and implementing professional values in primary school. Okay, so these are the authors, and syempre we have to identify the three elements of the title, di ba? Topic, okay, professional values; action, reclaim and implement, okay, and then intervention is actually action research. Okay, this one is not an action research. It may be converted into an action research, but I did not write it as that. Okay, so my working title was heading towards transformational outcome-based education, the case of a special physics education curriculum. But then after writing the entire paper, I transformed nag-transition din yung aking title, di ba? So nagkaroon ng ibang title, and the title is Transitions and Transformations in Philippine Physics Education Curriculum, a case research, okay? So that's one way of telling you that things could change. Mula dun sa working title, I had a different title, final title. So this is the article structure. I will be discussing a lot of this later. So we have 5 major parts. So madali lang, 5 lang, di ba? 5 lang. Okay, abstract and the details of how to write the abstract. We have the introduction with several subsections, but we don't usually place them as subsections. Okay, I mean, it's just a guide for us to determine and identify that we have completely written the storyline, the initial storyline of our story. Okay, the background of the study. There has to be a global trend or global anchor, national focus, and then the local focus. Then you have the literature review. We have this usually presented in thematic format. The year range should be 2011 to 2021. So please take note of a decade old, no? Kapag nag-identify tayo ng mga citations or literature. It's usually the ano bang tawag nila doon? Rule of thumb of publication. Okay, so may include the following: related legal basis, literature review, or studies. And statements are focused on the concept, and secondary are the authors. Okay, so it would be better if you start the statement with constructivism as defined by, kaysa naman Conde defined constructivism as, or Conde 2021 defined constructivism as. Okay? So we focus on the concepts, and secondary lang po yung authors. Okay? We have to provide the synthesis so we can identify the research or knowledge gap. Okay? From the knowledge gap, that's where that would be our stepping stone towards the significance of the research or the action research. And then you can identify the purposes of your action research. Okay? Purpose or purposes. So pwedeng isa lang. Yan. For the methods, we have the design, okay, we have the instruments, the participants, some tools or materials that you have used, okay, data collection, and the data analysis framework. And for the results, you can have the numbers, of course, the data, and then the discussion, compared the corresponding narrative or discussion, and then your conclusions and recommendations. Okay, so for the basics of the different key parts, you have the abstract. most readers would be very particular with the abstract, and the abstract is the synopsis of the entire paper. So it would be good if you have a very good abstract because it serves as an advertisement of your paper. Okay, so maybe you can have an introductory statement, or you can do away with that if you want, but you have to mention the major goal of the study. Okay, what we wanted is an abstract that would encompass all these things. Ayaw natin na yung abstract ay puro major goal o kaya specific objectives at natapos sa the intention of this action research is, okay? So, anong nangyari kung tayo ay babasa nun? Oh, so yun ang intention mo. So, anong nangyari? Hindi pa ba tapos to? Diba? Okay. You have to tell us what happened. And you have to tell us what were the findings. And you have to tell us the conclusions and recommendations, okay? For the introduction, we have the background, global theme, national focus, local emphasis or emphasis. In traditional research or in the usual manuscript that we are preparing, we follow this funnel-shaped presentation of the introduction, specifically the background of the study. But for action research, we can deviate. We can start with the local focus. Kasi ito yung nangyayari sa aking klase eh. So, dito ako magsisimula. Okay lang naman yon, diba? Parang, ito talaga ang problema sa klase ko ngayon. Pero alam nyo ba guys, na sa buong mundo, ganito rin naman ang nangyayari. Mga ganang kwento, di ba? At sa Pilipinas, ganyan din. Kaya talagang ang aking gustong mangyari ay ganito para masolusyonan yung problema ko sa klase. So, ganun ang kwento, no? Pwedeng ganon. But in traditional research, we do not usually follow that. Okay? Yeah. Then we have the literature survey, okay? And then the study rationale. So some tips in writing your introduction, you may, even if it's an action research, make use of the funnel shape format. Okay, we start with general until ending up with the major problem that you wanted to address, okay, within the class. Yeah. So I wrote this with some friends and colleagues, okay, examining teachers' conception of and needs on action research. It's an initial attempt to an action research. So, ibig sabihin, needs analysis pa lang. Hindi pa talaga siya action research. So, we followed the funnel shape. We had three paragraphs for the introduction. So, the first paragraph is all about a global context, okay, of quality education, etc. Regional context pagdating sa second paragraph. Syempre, pagdating sa third, Philippines na. Tapos dito na kami nagkwento, no? Tapos nandito sa baba, yung ano talaga yung problema namin. Mga ganon. Okay? So some tips, we have 2 to 3 pages will do, inclusive of the literature review. You need to have sub-level headings probably, okay? Brief context to the reader, citations, more recent literature would be good. You have to follow the style and format of the journals. Okay? Narrations of stories must be as clear as possible and no gaps. I usually make use of this one. I try to outline first, and the outline is placed in a matrix, so you can probably adapt that when you start writing your papers. Okay, and let's try this one. Okay. So lalagyan ko na agad ng sagot, ha? Ayan. How is introduction organized? Okay. Traditional research, we follow the funnel shape. But in action research, we can start with the conflict, the observation, the tension happening in the school, community, or in the classroom. Okay? Then you can probably shift to global and national focus before we can identify some background study and then the identified action. Okay. Now here is another sample. Look, the introductory portion is my context. Anong problema ko? Ganun agad, di ba? Wider context. Ano problema sa buong mundo in relation to my problem? Parang ganun. Okay? This is one action research I wrote with a DepEd teacher, si Ma'am Canindo, DepEd Manila. So this is our introduction. We follow the funnel shape. Okay, there. This is our literature review. We had three themes. Yeah. Mathematical proficiency, mathematical fluency, and automaticity, and then the intervention and strategies. Yeah. Okay. And then there. So some tips, you can use this one when you ask your friends or critical friends to critique your papers. Okay. Then you can state your purposes of the research. You can have one, you can have many, but maximum of 3 as much as possible. Okay. And this is for the methods. Here is a sample purpose of a research. Ito rin itong project na to, itong article na to. You can check this one. It's open access, so you can download. So we made use of single case action research here. And what we wanted is to determine the effect of combined teaching strategies. Yun lang ang aming purpose. Okay? And this is the corresponding result. So syempre, isa lang din yung result, di ba? Kung effective ba siya o hindi. Yan. Now, how do we write the methods? Usually, I take a look at the objectives again because most peer reviewers would look at coherence. So, itong problem ba na ito, anong method ang ginamit, anong result na lalabas, ganon. So, dapat lahat ng problems mo or objectives nakalista para guided ka lagi. Okay? This is the method section of this particular action research. Notice that the method section is phrased in a way which is different from how we phrase our method section for other manuscripts. Here, we made use of plan, act, reflect. Okay, some would be requiring plan, do, check, act, or plan, act, observe, discuss. Okay, so that's one of the major difference in preparing manuscripts for action research. So for the results and discussion, these are some sample tables sourced from results and discussion section of some of my papers. You would notice they're all numbers, okay? And this is the corresponding narrative. So what I mean is you have your numbers in tables, and tables are standalone. So which means that when you read or take a look at the table, you can interpret as a reader. But your role as a writer is to provide them some inferences because you have undergone the process. Diba? Kaya you can provide the inferences. They did not undergo the process that you have. So, hindi nila ma-identify or source out yung mga inferences na yan, mga explanations and all. O, yun ang trabaho natin. Yun ang nilalagay natin sa narrative. Okay? Yeah. So, syempre, magbibigay pa tayo ng additional explanations. So, gagamit tayo ng mga verbatim responses ng ating mga participants. Yan. So results should be clear and concise. Discussion should explore the significance of the results and not repeat them. So what I mean is, do not repeat the numbers provided in the tables. Huwag nyo na siyang banggitin doon sa narrative or very minimal lang as much as possible. Okay? Tables and figures are embedded in text, but some journals would require separately presented paper. Okay? Yeah. A combined results and discussion section is often appropriate. Well, it depends on your target journal. Avoid extensive citation and discussion of published literature kasi hindi naman related literature yung inyong ginagawa o kaya literature review, di ba? It's an action research manuscript. And you have to follow whatever standard the journal, your target journal, is implementing. So kung APA yan, kung sa normal lights, APA ang ginagamit namin. At the moment, it's 6th edition, but I am applying for a revision for the 7th. Okay? There. So, ganun din, kapag nagsusulat ako ng results and discussion, I go back to the objectives. I write the data collection process, what were the generated data, how will I interpret, and some literature citations. Okay? So, here is a sample. Again, remember the purpose of the research. O kaya ako siya nilagay dyan kasi kapag gumagawa ako ng matrix, ganun lagi. Bumabalik ako doon sa objectives. Okay? And so this is the results section. So the results section is inclusive of both quantitative and qualitative data. So we have comparison of means. Yan. And then we have some explanations. We draw some explanations from the, what do you call this one? From the verbatim responses of the students. When you source out verbatim responses and they are in the dialects, you have to place English translation in parenthetical formats, just like this one. Okay. We made use of figures because we wanted the readers to be able to identify the trends right away. So gusto namin makita nila agad na sa August tumataas. Okay. Dito din, gusto namin makita na maraming pula sa post-test. Okay? Kaya ganito yung ginamit namin. So, depende sa writers kung paano nila i-present yung data, di ba? So, nasa kaartehan, artistic capability of the authors. Okay? There. So, So for the conclusions and recommendations, I find this way of presenting this section very effective to editors. So the first paragraph, you have to restate the purpose of your study. The second to the fourth, if you have 3 problems, you can maximize these 3 paragraphs for you to discuss some implications of the findings from the 3 phases, kung phases man yun, or 3 objectives. Pero kung isa lang, di isang paragraph lang yan, ba? The 5th paragraph would be about identifying the limitations of the study, okay, and how other researchers may be able to address these limitations. And of course, how do you envision this research in the future? That would be the 6th paragraph. Okay. The same thing, I make use of a matrix when I write my conclusions and recommendations. Again, it's going back to the objectives. Okay, so parang ang dinadasalan ko lagi no, si objectives. Nasaan ka na? Ano ka ba? Mga ganun. Okay? So some other parts, of course, you need the reference list. You can make use of different applications. There are a lot of available applications. You have the Mendeley. You have that one available in G Suite if you are with DepEd. You can access ECBib, or you can make use of Microsoft Word, the capability of Microsoft Word for referencing. Okay. Some other parts, you need keywords, and keywords are usually used to index your paper in the cloud. You know? So, ibig sabihin, pag pumili kayo ng keywords, ito yung mga napakadaling matandaan related sa inyong paper at madaling i-research ng mga researchers. So, for example, physics activities, tinype nila sa Google, di lalabas yung isang paper ko kasi isa sa keywords niya iyon. Okay? And then the acknowledgement, it should be very short. Hindi yung, I would like to thank my cat who gave me inspiration. Walang ganon, di ba? Very, very formal and short. Okay? And the cover letter is very important because it's a way of communicating to the editor. The editor will not read your paper right away. Okay? He or she will read your cover letter. And the cover letter has to give a lot of information for the editor to be convinced to read your paper. So try to include your intention to publish in the journal, your major findings, and how the findings would contribute to the journal. Okay? Some conflict of interest. Yeah. This is the publication process. It's a long process from the author, tapos na kayo magsulat. Sasabihin niyo sa editor. Si editor yan, dami-daming gagawin. O pag okay na, at sa tingin niya, medyo may kagandahan naman itong inyong papel, ibibigay niya yan kay reviewer. So, from the reviewer, pag na-review niya, babalik kay editor checks, decides whether to accept, for revision, or reject. So, babalik kay author. Now, kung for revision yan, well, depende na lang ang palitan nyo ni editor hanggang masatisfy si editor na, okay, eto na, maganda na pagkakasulat talaga. Okay, let's publish. Yan. Okay? Some things to remember about the evaluation process. These are the things that these people look for. Editor, thematic relevance, significant contribution, originality, use of literature, and formatted style. For reviewer, clarity, technical quality, and organization. Your abstract, the title, the use of data, sound conclusion and discussion, and length of paper. So for example, you have an action research, mga 1 to 2 pages lang dapat ang intro. Kasi kung mga 4 pages yan, tapos 3,000 words yan, abay wala ka na paglalagyan ng methods at saka results, di ba? Yan. So some insights, again, please practice unity. You have to observe coherence in your paper. You have to include a lot of support, clarity, clarify what your findings, illustrate your findings, you provide ideas, you explain or use examples. Have effective paragraphs. Hindi pa ulit-ulit. Nasabi nyo na sa methods na gumamit kayo ng action research. Inuulit-ulit nyo pa. Magagalit si editor niyan, tsaka si reviewer. Okay? Word choice, grammar, and sentence length. I hope that your sentences would be short enough and not so long so that the readers, when they read, hindi naman sila mahimatay sa hingal, ano? Okay. Kaya tama lang yung haba. Okay? Some other tips, I think these are some few slides. You have to consult. You have to attend other webinars, especially those sponsored by other journals or the premium journals that we have. You can check our Facebook page. Paki-like na rin kapag nag-check kayo. Okay, salamat. Okay. And some other insights, when you submit your papers and you are intending authors, rejection is normal. Okay? It's not new normal, it's really normal. Okay? Be patient and be humble. Learn to strategize. Be optimistic. Mapapublish din yan after 48 years, hindi 48 hours. Okay? You have to be simple in writing. Please do not use very difficult words. It's not the uso these days. Okay? Be mindful of the journal standards. Read and read and read the author guidelines. Try to collaborate and build your credibility as a researcher. Some other tips. You have to love the writing process. No pressure dapat. Otherwise, you will not be able to write good manuscripts. Okay? Chill, chill. Do some physical activities para hindi naman kayo mangawit dyan. Ouch, ouch na, no? Iwasan ng FB habang nagsusulat, okay? And please bear in mind that small steps lead to big goals, okay? These are some of my references. Ayan, at maraming salamat po.